We began a discussion last week, and I know we have city staff recommendation here in our packets. I think that, first of all, there's a lot of information which need to be presented, and I think the city staff has done an initial job here that's great. I've asked for, and don't need to go through, but I've asked for a compilation of what staff believe are what I would say are the major examples of properties that are or aren't on any of our registers today. And I think this is a great beginning point for conversation.
The 750 total?
No.
Different ones? I'm not sure what we're...
No, I don't think that has a, well, I said I asked staff for something. I don't know that you have it particularly. I'm just saying this is a beginning point of conversation to begin to look at what's been designated and not been designated. I think that's an incredibly important first step. I think the second step is, obviously things have changed since 2001, and I personally believe we should fund, I don't know that this isn't a recommendation, but some consultant support to maybe redo our priorities. So the first message that I'm trying to say is I don't think we need to be in the business of dealing with this when something's threatened. The time to preserve something is now. It's not when, oh my God, there's a potential sale or a potential ownership change or whatever. That, I think the time to look at is now. And when I say now, I mean long before there's any kind of potential threat to it. I'm really fascinated why some of our properties in our city are on national registers of historic places but not on local ones. And then some are on local and not national. So one of the things that I would like to have an assessment of is, you know, what is the difference between the two? What is the rationale behind one or the other? And maybe even review. So this is, I think, for all knowledge. What are what are some of the you know, kind of side-by-side comparisons of what one status gives you and what the other status doesn't give you? I don't fully understand the difference between what a Winter Park registry gives you versus a national register or a district gives you. So are all the properties that are in districts there or not? That's something else that I think we need to look at. And is federal protection sufficient if something's on a national register but not on a local register? I don't know. I don't know that. I also would like to understand, at least of the 128 properties that were discussed in 2001 in a survey, I want to understand why people have not voluntarily placed their things on this. So before the city is asked to unilaterally make a decision on 128 or 500 or whatever properties, I think it would be important to look from 2001 to the present and say, what has and hasn't worked? And I think that there's a strong, and I'll use Casa Feliz as a wonderful example of private preservation. That was a plan where citizens came together and came up with that. I look at the Osceola Lodge, which I understand is on the national register but not on the local register. And that is obviously in a group of people that preserve it and take good care of it. I don't know what a designation of us on that would or wouldn't do. But I think that those are good examples of projects in our city that I think in both cases would be recognized as highlighted and important. The other thing that I would say is I think that we need to set a goal to say, maybe it's hard to say this, but and I'm going off of the 2001 list, if there were 128 buildings identified as potentially eligible for listing on the Winter Park and National Register of Historic Places, what have we done to get that done? So, you know, to say, well, either we need to take a city action, or I'm not even sure our staff have knocked on 128 doors if they're not all on this list and go, we want this. What can we do to make that happen? Or somebody may push back and say, we don't want it because we want to add a bathroom or an ADA accessible bathroom, which, by the way, has happened in both of our most historic buildings. Both Casa Feliz is an example, as well as Osceola Lodge. And those both have, I think, the National Historic Register, and one has Winter Park, for example. So let me begin by saying, first of all, I think there needs to be a lot of information that's created and generated. And then I think that we need to go through a process, and I think this is where I would suggest consultation could be of support to us, as it was when we went through the historic district designations for the CBD. We do need to compare to what I would perceive are communities that we want to compare to. So I've already seen comparisons to Gainesville, to St. Augustine, to Coral Gables, to Sarasota, to upstate New York. I don't know that any of those are like us or not like us. I think some are probably much more like us than others. And I think that's really, really important for us to say who are organizations or cities that have done this really, really well, and what kind of efforts have they embraced as a community to get it done. So a benchmark, I think, is very, very important. So I'm arguing for 4 things. First of all, I think it's important to get all of the information about all the properties that we have now. There's a great on YouTube, and by the way, as of last night, there were 20 hits to it. 20 in the last, I don't know how many years. But our city library put on a 2-minute presentation on all of the historic properties in Winter Park. Very quick, very good, well done kind of thing. 20 people looked at that, now 21. I think just having an appreciation of all of it in totality is very, very important to our community. We may be doing a great job preserving the entire community. We may not be doing a good job at all. And I think at this point to suggest it project by project probably minimizes the overall view of historic preservation. So I would propose the following things. One, that we ask staff to do a thorough and complete understanding, and that requires a consultation from a reputable source outside of us in historic places to do another definition of what are historic buildings in Winter Park. I think we need to know that, an inventory. The second is I think that we need a clear comparison between what does local historic designation do versus national. And what are the pros and cons, I would say, and what are the opportunities in both of those. Thirdly, I think we need to do an inventory of why people haven't chosen to do this. It's been in place for 12 years and a lot of people haven't chosen to do this. I'd like to understand why. Maybe they just haven't been asked. So we may get a long way just by asking. And then the comparison to other municipalities that I think we want to compare to, I think is important. I personally believe that our historical preservation advisory board should be the kind of the touch point of where this data goes through. I would argue our P&Z board probably ought to be looking at that also, especially if it gets to the demolition comparisons, because they obviously deal with planning and zoning. And, I've heard a lot about the historic value, the economic value. I think our EDAB maybe ought to look at that and bring a report back to us on what is the economic value of historic preservation. I think instinctively, to me, everybody gets that. That's, to me, not that important to review, because I think we all instinctively understand this is very, very important. What I'm calling for is a carefully review of all of our properties. And that just doesn't occur on a property by property basis, but looks at the entire city, looks at the inventory across the board. And hopefully, and this again is on non-action items, so it's not something that we can formalize here today, but I would like to argue that work could begin maybe even at our next city commission meeting, and we really receive from city staff and others information about what's necessary to do the complete inventory. And I'm going to argue to do this right, because I think doing it piece by piece, property by property might be the tactical implementation, but I think we're missing what is a major historical opportunity, and that is to preserve all of Winter Park. So those are my thoughts on this, and I welcome, there's been so many people that I really want to compliment both Casa Feliz and the Historical Society for releasing a beautiful letter to the commission last Thursday. I don't have a copy of that, but in our emails, that we all share like goals, and this doesn't need to be a vilified process in our city. This is something that we all need to be working together on, and that's the spirit with which I bring, and I think that everybody wants to address this. So those are my thoughts on the issue.
I don't know if everyone had a chance to read that. I think there was an email addressed to the City Commission late this afternoon prior to our meeting. And in that correspondence, the suggestion was the creation of a task force to do much of what you're talking about, Mr. Mayor, in the context of when we did the original 2001 survey, there was a historic resources task force that was put together, and it had representatives from these different boards. It had representatives from the community at large. It had representatives from real estate interests and whatnot. And that kind of focused group of individuals may be the way and it may take some time, because I think, I agree with the gist of that email, that it's a decision that our community makes about historic preservation. And I've continued to say to individuals that have emailed me, I've responded to, that this really needs to be a bottom-up decision, because those are where trends come from. All fads are always top-down and trends are bottom-up. And this really needs to be a community conversation that perhaps this task force would be the ones to conduct that would come back to us and say, here's what we value in our city, because I think each one of us values our city for some of the same reasons and for some different reasons, but that this group could do much what you're talking about. I'm with you on the, it's probably in, there's dollars that you would go back and expend on historic, another update of historic resources survey that would do this what you're talking about, look at all the resources here within our community that are listed as historic and be able to get the information that you're asking for, and that would require potentially some outside help to do that. But I'm a little, in my own thought, I'm a little hesitant of putting it out to 4 or 5 different boards. I'd like to see that expertise, and I use the word task force because we can give it a time frame. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a year, whatever that might be. I like that idea. I think that might, just as we did back in 2001, I think that may get us the results in a more coherent form.
Tom, my concern about a task force versus using our existing boards is in 2001, I don't think we had an existing board. I think that came from that group and that work. And I would love to see what our own existing boards could do for us initially. They could certainly listen around the clock to experts and others who could come in, as well as concerned citizens in our city. I would hope that they would. I think if they failed to do that, we would have issues. I think the other thing that's really missing in this conversation is our city could have positive historic preservation and create potential legal liabilities by some of our actions. And I'm not sure a task force takes that into consideration. So I think our advisory board would, who have to ultimately enforce what they think of.
Well, the task force is assigned potentially by the 5 of us sitting here, so we could certainly put people on there that we believe that would be responsive to whatever liabilities the city might be opening. So my concern is that you've got 5 or 6 different boards operating 5 or 6 different days a week at different times, and you're trying to get input and coordination across a large.
Well, I'm suggesting it be the historical advisory board.
And Mr. Mayor, I take that, I look at the Historic Preservation Board, and their mission is they're responsible for the development and administration of a comprehensive historic preservation program that shall identify and maintain the city's historic resources for the benefit of present and future residents. That's what we're talking about. That is what they're charged with doing. So it's a great board. It's an impressive board. I don't see the need to, I actually think it's quite honestly a bit of a slap in the face to appoint a task force to do their job that they have all applied for and have been appointed for. So I have a little bit of deal, and I get the economic development aspect of it, and I sat through that. That's a great board, and what's great about that board too is when issues come up and they start to stray a little bit, they all go right back to, that's not what we're here to discuss, guys. We're here to discuss the economic development. So, I'd like to hear their perspective on it.
I kind of perceive that, and not that you wouldn't, and I kind of perceive the task force, it's much like when we created the tree preservation board, there are individuals assigned to that board from many other boards, because they wanted input from all of those, so to actually created a board out of other boards in effect. There's still some independent members of that, but I don't look at it as a slap in the face. I look at it as how do you focus this activity? And much in my career, if I need a structural engineer, I go out and hire one. I don't say, gee, I've got a bunch of guys in the office that are really smart. I say I need something specific done, and I go and I do that.
But we have city staff dedicated to that board, and we have that board dedicated to that
But
mission.
you know, that's oh,
I understand, Tom,
an opinion.
But we also have,
You know, we're not gonna
you know,
either decide or whatever.
I don't want to start with the opinion that what we have is broken. Maybe that's the wrong approach to take. I want to start with the opinion of what we have today, which has been well thought out since 2001. I'm assuming it's been well thought out. Maybe hasn't accomplished all of our goals. It may be a staff implementation, it may be a city commission implementation, it may be citizen implementation. I don't know that it necessarily has to go straight to, there's an ordinance that, you know, that needs to be immediately changed. I don't know if there is or isn't at this point. Our ordinances might be really up to muster and up to speed, and what we have is an implementation issue.
I think that's exactly what we have. I do agree with you, Tom, relative to the task force. And I can remember when I was on P&Z, and we had at that point in time a task force put together on architectural review board, which was a really hot topic in town. But I will say to you that as a board, we got a lot of information and benefit. It wasn't like they were there to supersede our information. They brought things to us. It wasn't like they were looked upon as taking our place. They actually were helping us and advising us. And the nice thing about a task force is each one of us knows people who have the skill set, the concentrated skill set, because our boards are wonderful, but they're not all experts in the field, and we can get people who are, and each one of us could bring one of those people to the table and actually have them assist I wouldn't want them not to go through our historic preservation board. I mean, I do think that's good, and not to present to our EDAB board, but I just think by having a task force, you can focus in on the job at hand as opposed to trying to do their regular quasi-judicial function, which is a job in and of itself, and they're all volunteers. So, yeah, I would support the idea of a task force.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, it just reminds me of DC. You know, when things hit a little bit of a hiccup, give it to, bring in more people. I think we have, as I said, that is.
They can't be outside.
But these people, this board, I mean, it is an open board. They sit in the open. When they're discussing these things, as the mayor said, I mean, I would anticipate people coming to voice their opinions to share with the board to help direct the board. They're not gonna meet in some closed room and say, this is what we're gonna do. I mean, this will be a very public forum with people who signed up, were appointed by this commission and previous commissions to serve on the historic preservation board, I think. I mean,
These are pretty time-consuming tasks that we've listed out here in our board tasks, and I like to see them done.
Yeah, but if you look back at what happened in 2001, we've already got all this, folks. GAI, we must have paid a lot of money to them. I don't know how much, but we had to pay a lot of money in order to get all of these documents that are still, this is preservation. They hadn't changed that much, folks. And so these documents are still there. They're very positive, very good documents. And I learned a great deal from going through that. But I don't know that they've been updated. And so that, to me, is where we are. This is something, they made recommendations that perhaps we wouldn't be here today if we had followed those recommendations, okay? So there's a lot of things that we need to go back and look at and say, okay, where is this? But I have to tell you that I think we can do both. I think we can send this to the board that is responsible for this and request that they use the task force concept in the sense that they ask people to come in and speak to this. And the reason I say that is that this is something that needs to be owned by this entire community. One little board can't own this, okay? It's got to be owned by everybody, but it's got to be owned and started with the board that is responsible for this. So let's start with them. Let's go back to what we've got on the record now that shows some excellent work, and let's say, how can we move this forward? Because Ken's question about why do we not have more people? Guys, there's 750 different buildings in this community who qualify. 750 according to the records in 2001. That's huge. That's huge. And so with that, we've got to start looking at what we can do to make this more appropriate. So I think, I'm not sure, we have, staff, this is what we do. And then if they come back to us and say, you know, GAI needs to help us, or whoever, you know, I don't know who did it, I just found that out from reading it, but this is a big job. You're right, it's a big job. But let's go back to the process we've put in place called boards and say, let's make this work. Tell us what your plan is. Maybe they'll tell us they want to do the task force kind of concept. Because when we did MLK, you put a task force together, we still went through some boards. So I love that it works almost, you know, all the time, but we've got a lot of stuff. We just haven't, I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't aware of it. And you know, when you start going back to it, and I'm not sure how people get a record of this. I'm not sure where they find it, because I asked Michelle for it and got it. But this is something that the community would enjoy reading and learning about the surveys and how it was accomplished.
The other thing is, I think we need to define what is historic preservation.
Right?
So, and I use Osceola Lodge as a great example. As I understand it, it's on the National Register of Historic District, but not on the cities. Is that being preserved? I would argue it's probably one of our greatest preservation efforts in our city. So, you know, that was done, I don't know, did the city take a board action? I don't think so. I think a group of people said, this is a great thing to preserve. So, you know, part of what I think we have to understand is what is our role? Is it to force the issue? Is it to incentivize the issue? Is it to accomplish what we have? And then let's look at what's happened since 2011, 2001. You know, we preserved the facade on Lincoln properties, for example, or Lincoln apartment, and the church did that. We have a facade. Do we feel good about that? I guess we feel better than if it was a different facade. You know, those are, I think, are important things. Barber House, you mean what became Casa, what we know is, oh, yes, what a great. Now, I don't know that the city did that. I think that's something that groups of people came together to do. So I think we need to also set what is the ultimate goal. Is it 100% of these properties are on a register? If that's the goal, I don't know that that creates necessarily historic preservation, but I would argue that's one of the tangible goals to try to establish is some percentage of property. You know,
And I think that was one of the
as an
things that
example.
happened in the report, is they actually went through and said which ones out of the total group.
It's fascinating because even if you look at any building, I've just been in several of these, they've had changes. So, they've had bigger bathrooms added and et cetera. So are they preserved? Absolutely. I think that's a critical thing to do, but I would hope that a broad-minded group of people could articulate for us what is historic preservation. And I certainly want to look at the great examples of throughout the country as what those things might be to inform us. You know, we're not Charleston, we're not Savannah, we're not Coral Gables, we're Winter Park. Those are all things need to inform us. We need to be informed by St. Augustine. We're not St. Augustine. We don't have a 500-year track record. We have a 126-year track record. And we need to encourage that so that when we're done with it, we know what we have. Because this is my challenge with it today is we did all that work, Sarah, in 2001. And now we have I guess, a lot of concern over a property. I'm very concerned about that property. I'm glad to hear from our city manager that there might be some solutions to that specific piece of property. I don't want to be so focused on a specific property that we lose the big picture. And I suppose that is in the eye of each beholder. Are we preserving or not? If anything has been demolished, is that preservation or not? I don't know, but to look at this and to start with 700 or 128 or even the top 20 and not have a plan for those, to me is, the time to have a plan is not when somebody wants to add a bathroom or knock it down. Now's the time to have a plan. And to figure out, again, I'm looking at a list of some of these that have no listing. None.
Because the owners.
Well, I don't know why. I don't know why, but we should know why.
Right.
And if the owners don't want to do that, I think that needs to inform our historic preservation ordinance.
what can we do to make them want to?
Right,
That's
exactly.
right.
What
Yeah.
can we do to
Yeah.
incentivize it? And I think the best thing, Sarah, was this particular plan does have lots of recommendations. And some of those recommendations would allow us to get grants to help us maintain these sorts of things. And one thing, Mayor, that you said about the code, maybe there's nothing wrong with our code. I would say to you that that quite possibly is true, having gone back now and studied it. But how we are implementing things within the city, you know, might be a problem. One of the functions that our code allows is that the Historic Preservation Board is to recommend for or against demolitions on properties that are on the Florida Master Site File Plan. Well, the Capen House was there, but somehow between this and the way we do business, it fell off the radar. So I think our codes probably are okay. I think implementing that plan would be a great benefit for the city. And I would love to see us start pursuing that certification that would allow us to get grants to go back and update this maybe anytime that it's necessary. You know, I
But it
believe
should be
it
on an
doesn't
ongoing
change much.
basis, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, I think this is one of those things we should be reporting on.
That's-
You know,
it should
how
be
we
on our
doing?
strategic
Yeah, let's
plan.
put it up there. And so, we've done a good job of starting it. We've got some good base data. But I'd love to see our board come back with some recommendations with the specific goal that we have of making sure that we at least start here and start looking towards that.
I also say this with due respect to any board, we have to realize, just as we do in any kind of property issue, that there are legal implications. And I'm not saying that good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying we have to address this just like every single issue has a legal implication. And I think making sure that we get good legal advice early on is critical. And I don't want this to be property rights versus historic preservation, which the, you know, the discussion has been kind of around that as of late. And I kind of like to argue you can do both. And I think there can be a way that both of those can come together for common good. But, you know, we need to clearly understand the whys before we go out and change it. Because, you know, it's going to quickly come down in my mind is, does the city take action to force a designation upon somebody or not? And I'm not going to weigh in on that right now, but I think that might be one of the solutions that somebody comes up with, and we're going to have to carefully think about it. I mean, that's something that, excuse me,
Bless you.
that's something that carefully needs to be thought through, so.
Well, when we started talking about this, my discomfort with what came to us on, in our packet was it was a Band-Aid, okay? And I guess because I wanted a big picture, I didn't want a Band-Aid. And so what are we saying about what's in front of us right now? And we see that as a Band-Aid for changing the,
Well, what's in front of us right now, I think, is an element of what I've proposed
okay.
and suggest. And that is obviously our demolition, which is how this was first discussed, you know, needs to be looked at as part of this, because that
Okay.
seems to be the
problem area.
well, I don't want to say it's the problem area. I think it's a galvanizing point when something is threatened and potentially may change. You know, unless something is a virgin property, everything's been bulldozed in the city at one point for something else to be built. And I guess there's maybe 5 or 6 examples, Lindsay, of things that haven't been.
Burn down.
Or something happened and something was rebuilt in its place. So, you know, I don't know, maybe there's technical designations for historic preservation, and maybe there's more what I would describe as lay people or civic preservation kind of things that we need to strive for. The other thing is, and our ordinance probably doesn't go deep enough even to suggest of, you know, once you get that designation, what does it mean?
Right.
Is it just a plaque on our building, which many of our plaques have, many of our homes have, especially in Aurora Manor, where I've knocked on a lot of doors. That's a worthy thing. You know, I love the concept of it can provide grants. That's great. I don't know. I've done this enough to know that I don't know that there's much money in it, and I don't know that should be the purpose of what we do here. I think that the concept of what it looks like and what is our goal ultimately to achieve is what's missing here today. And we deal with it on a property by property basis, and what I'm arguing is that's important, but that's the urgent. That's not necessarily the long-term view or the critical view. And we have to deal with the urgent. If the patient's bleeding, we gotta fix their wounds right now, but then we gotta make sure that they get into a situation where they never bleed again. And that's what I hope happens with both of these. Cape and House is obviously a rallying cry and a call. It's being dealt with, I hope. At least, and if the city needs to be involved, we'll figure out a way to be involved if we have to. But there's a private solution. Those, frankly, normally are the best solutions that come out. And I think having something that looks at this in a broad way is important. I don't know that there's 3 to go forward or not, but what I would argue is to place this on our action items requiring discussion. I heard at least 3 to continue to discuss that. And I'll work with staff to put out a document that discusses at least what I would describe as 4 steps in the group to do that, which initially is our historic group, with all the help they can get. All the citizen input, all the interested parties that they can get. And I would like to set some time certain to this. It may mean more than a weekly meeting, or a monthly meeting. This is an important thing. I would wait for staff to designate maybe what they think it might take a time to do. But, you know, where we're at today is a commentary on everybody's actions over the last, since 2001. And we need to relook at this and make sure that it's accomplishing what we want. I'm not assuming that something's broken in ordinances right off the bat. I'm not. And yet, I think the last case certainly showed there were numerous issues on all sides. I hope we come up with a goal so that we can smile 5 years or 10 years later and say, we have received the designations and the recognitions that mean this is important to our community, as well as accomplishing broad things. And I don't know if that's measured in demolishments or not. I don't know. I think it's measured in other things. That's probably an issue to look at, but it's more than preservation. So, other comments or questions about that? Okay, to be discussed, and that's important. And I appreciate everybody's involvement in our community that have weighed in on this. I think there's going to be a much better work product because we're all talking about it. I'll open the floor for citizen comments, and then I'm going to take our break. Any citizens wishing to discuss matters that have not been discussed or coming before us at this point?
Good afternoon. I'm Betsy Owens, representing the Friends of Casa Feliz. I'd like to thank you for your kind words earlier, Mr. Mayor, and for all of your willingness to consider historic preservation as an important issue facing our community. A point of clarity, the National Register differs from a local register in many ways, but it's a common misconception that National Register designation offers any kind of protection for a building from either being dramatically changed or demolished. It's an honorary designation, but there are buildings every year that are on the National Register that are demolished. Our local register, however, does make it very difficult to demolish any building that has that plaque. With all due respect, I feel that the events in recent weeks have caused our community to lose faith in our government's ability to protect our historic resources in Winter Park. Looking back a little further, in the last 20 years, 1 in every 8 homes in Winter Park has been demolished. In the last 4 years, 174 of those homes are in the Via area alone. And concerning our local register, which does offer protection to historic properties, in 2012, only 3 houses were designated. In 2011, 1 was designated and then removed. In 2010, only 2 were added, and in 2009, only 1 house was added. So clearly, there are problems in our historic preservation program, but lessening Winter Park's brand by over-designating willy-nilly around town is not one of them. What's happened in recent weeks, for better or for worse, has shown a bright light on the gaping holes in our preservation code. There are those in the community who have excellent knowledge and resources to share. one of them is a walking encyclopedia on historic preservation, and Lindsay Hayes, who we're very fortunate to have her. But I believe that by establishing a bottom-up approach, reaching wide to bring in members from the community at large, from the Chamber of Commerce, from Casa Feliz, from the Realtors, from a bunch of different designated groups, it will go a long way to instill the confidence of our citizenry in the government's ability to protect our culture and heritage in Winter Park, and also promote the healing that is so sorely needed. I understand that there are legal implications to any kind of action on historic preservation, but Winter Park is not unique in grappling with the balance.
I'll bring you another minute, Betsy, but if you could conclude your comments,
Sure.
I would appreciate it.
I just want to say that Winter Park is not unique in grappling with legal issues of property rights versus preserving our historic fabric. There's lots of examples out there that we could look to. And like you said, Mr. Mayor, we're not Coral Gables, we're not Charleston, but there are a lot of other communities in Winter Park who are doing a more credible job of protecting their historic properties than we are. So I thank you again for your willingness to listen, and I hope you'll consider making the review of our code a broad-based effort to include people from throughout the city. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Jeffrey Blydenberg, 204 Genius Drive. I share Betsy's thanks to you in terms of your willingness to consider the idea of the task force and how that can come together with the Historic Preservation Board to look at a broad base of our heritage. Our heritage points to the direction we're going and who we are as a community. How we deal with our historic resources has a lot to do with how we go forward. And that's where I wanted to just focus the comments a bit as you are considering how to deal with these issues. When you were talking about the future developments coming up, talking about 1792 and Denning, you've heard me speak more than once from this position of saying we need a master plan. We have a comp plan that covers a lot of these issues. I was just reading, while I was sitting there in your discussion, I was reading what the comp plan says about historic resources and all those things, and it's in the comp plan, and it says we will do these things. So we're doing what we're supposed to do in the comp plan. What we have not done, the reason all those kinds of things are going on in 1792 is just market-driven stuff happening, and we have the opportunity to guide this if we want to. It's the same thing as the preservation. I go back to that, we are the city of culture and heritage, and we have the ability to shape that. And so I would offer that in addition to this task force addressing preservation, that it is looking at part of our heritage is who we are, the scale of who we are. The trees come into that, the buildings come into that, our cultural facilities come into that, the scale of our community comes into that. All of those things are part of it. That, what you brought up earlier, Carolyn, about that dreaded idea of an architectural review board comes into that. Because it, and it really comes to the community. What level, to Ken's point, what level of control does the community want you all to have? And I'm asking the same question, and that's for the conversation to come up from this community to say, what level of control do we want to have to be who we are? Don't know the answers yet. That's the whole reason for doing this. And then when it comes back, we'll say, well, this is what we want for preservation, this is what we'd like for planning, this is what we'd like for design guidelines, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you very much for moving forward on that. I'm hoping that it will be a task force leading it. I think that's the best way, but doing it in cooperation with the historic board could work as well. Thank you very much.